Psychology is a touchstone of human experience. Given that there isn't anything you can conceive of which doesn't come from your experiences, psychology can potentially speak to practically any subject. Studying conversion and deconversion, there are two terms that one has to wrestle with almost constantly. Those words are faith and doubt, both of which would seem to stand in opposition to the other. Let's look into that here on Switching Sides. It's easy to see why a term like faith has been shunted entirely into the category of religion. There are certainly ways of using the word faith that aren't religious. I could talk about my faithful pet, or Old Faithful in Yellowstone Park, or I'll have a faith in my sports team to win. But if you ask a person on the street what faith means, or even look in a dictionary, you'll see that the word itself is taken to be a religious word. But what about the word doubt? Well, people generally tend to be a little looser with the use of the word doubt. Will the Baltimore Orioles make it to the World Series next year? I doubt it. I try my best to be a good person, but I struggle with self-doubt. You say the moon landing was faked, but I doubt that's true. See what I mean? We don't use the word doubt as religiously as we do faith. However, if you look at psychology studies using the keyword doubt, they are entirely related to religion. As far as the academic psychology goes, doubt is a religious word. As a researcher, that isn't as helpful as you'd think. When I dig down into the mechanics of human behavior, I want to see what makes people behave. And I expect doubt, whatever it may be, is a mental mechanism that isn't exclusive to religious belief. Well, it took me a while, but I was eventually able to make the connection between doubt and common experiences we can all relate to inside or outside religion. Let's say that last week you checked the corner store for milk and there wasn't any. This week, someone tells you that there's milk at the corner store. Do you doubt your experience from the last week? Probably not. There's a very simple explanation for how you didn't find milk last week, but there's milk this week. A lot can change in a week, and stores do occasionally restock. Now let's say you check the store for milk, you don't find any, and go straight to the register. You ask the clerk when milk will be back in the stock, and she tells you milk currently is on the shelf. Well, you know better. You were looking at the shelf just a minute ago, and it was empty. You have very good experience that contradicts the clerk's assertion. So the clerk leads you back to the shelf, and it is full of milk. Now you have a very uncomfortable problem. You have to question your own experience. Is there something wrong with you? How can you explain the fact that the milk wasn't there when you looked and now it is? This uncomfortable emotion of believing one thing and then having your beliefs blatantly contradicted has a name. It's called cognitive dissonance. When we think of emotions, we think of the standards: love, anger, jealousy, happiness, excitement, sadness, etc. However, there are a few experiences we have, but we don't necessarily put in that category. But they are, in fact, emotions. Two of these are related: certainty and doubt, or cognitive dissonance. When that clerk led you to the shelf to see the milk, you were certain that she was going to discover that you already knew that the shelf was empty. You were experiencing the emotion of certainty. But when you got there, you were struck in the face with a cruel reality. The clerk was right, and you were wrong. Now, you experience doubt. And it isn't fun. Put very simply, cognitive dissonance is the extremely uncomfortable feeling of holding two ideas in your mind which are incompatible. In the case of my illustration, they would be, I just saw an empty shelf, now I see a shelf full of milk. Your mind struggles to overcome the dissonance by making the two ideas work together. This means finding some kind of explanation. Maybe it was looking at the wrong shelf and just didn't realize it. Maybe someone came along and restocked it really quickly. Or maybe, just maybe, the whole thing was an elaborate prank on the part of the grocery store. This kind of thinking seems extreme, but it is part of human nature to reject taking credit for one's own failures. Why is that? Well, when you set out to accomplish a thing, like find milk, the goal in your mind is to get the thing done. Say the goal is to find the milk in the store. If you find milk, your intention is complete, and you can take credit for following through on the thing you set out to do. But if you fail, the result is the opposite of your intentions. So you naturally aren't going to try to claim the failure, because you weren't trying to fail. You were trying to succeed. So you place credit for the failure on things outside of your control, rather than on yourself. Now, the subject of this channel is conversion and deconversion. One can see how the subject of doubt plays into deconversion, but, in fact, dissonance theory in psychology would have us believe that most human behaviors are a result of the attempt to resolve these dissonances in our mind. Think of the homeostasis that living organisms seek to maintain. Your internal temperature has to be consonant with the external temperature. The pressure on your inner ear adjusts to the air pressure around you. Even so, your mind seeks to maintain balance. Your alarm wakes you up in the morning and you want to sleep more, but you also feel the duty to get up and go to work or school. Immediately, you are hit with a dissonance you have to resolve by taking action. And this goes on throughout your day, as you have to constantly balance your needs, wants, responsibilities, and resources. There are a couple of ways to resolve a dissonance. The obvious ones are to choose one thing or the other. In terms of deconversion, Christianity seems comfortable and good, but it also doesn't make a good sense. So the person selects the belief, or they select for unbelief, and resolve the conflict by discarding one of the two options on the table. Another way to resolve dissonance is to ignore, distract yourself, or just live with it. And that brings us to what I have called the prohibitive principle. When a person is on the cusp of questioning his or her faith, the prohibitive principle is that obstacle which stands in the path and prevents the person from considering the unconsiderable. Perhaps the problem is guilt. I don't want to be critical of God or my church. Perhaps the problem is fear. What would happen if I started asking questions? Would my friends and family stop liking me? Would I end up in hell? Would I lose my faith? Other prohibitions could be a sense of loyalty or confidence, or even being comfortable where you are and not wanting to rock the boat. Whatever it is, the prohibitive principle doesn't give you permission to doubt. Sometimes something happens in your life as a believer to remove that prohibitive principle. I call this event the trigger. I will use an example of a girl named Rachael Slick. Slick's deconversion is old news now, about 10 years old as of the time of this recording. But it made a splash at the time when she announced it, and this was largely because she was the daughter of a very well-known Christian apologist. For Rachael, the prohibitive principle was confidence. Growing up with a dad who had all the answers and could shoot down all the objections to Christianity, she thought there wasn't an objection she could raise that didn't have an answer. However, when she was in college, Rachael got into a relationship with a guy, and they became very intimate. Now, Rachael suffered with the dissonance we mentioned before. She was sleeping with a guy, but her Christian beliefs told her that this was a very wrong thing to be doing. In her blog post on her deconversion, she said that she was in fear of hell every time they became intimate. At this point, Rachael is suffering the full discomfort of dissonance in the form of guilt. All she needs is to have the prohibitive principle removed. In this case, that there are no objections to Christianity that cannot be answered. In her blog on her deconversion, Rachael talks about walking around campus with a friend, throwing difficult questions at one another. Rachael asks, if God's laws are unchanging, how come the laws in the Old Testament are so different from the ones in the New Testament? After asking that question, she says, she realized she could not answer it. This, she says, is because there was no answer. At this point, her prohibitive principle had been removed. She found a question that had no answer, and so she could now have permission to start questioning. And question she did. She describes her whole world crashing down as she realized she had been following an ancient religion made up by some Bronze Age shepherds. What Rachael described going through here is what I call processing. When people talk about deconversion, the processing stage is the one most focused upon. However, in order to get to the processing, it's necessary to go through the previous stages I mentioned. And this is, in a nutshell, my model of religious deconversion. Thanks for watching. Switching Sides.